Franson is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Joining him is Daniel Sanderson, CEO of Planksip, an international philosophy and cultural media outlet, helping emerging thought leaders with personal branding by co-creating organic content. Tonight's episode, Dress and Keep the Garden, with Sienna Mae Heath.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade Franson. Dan Sanderson is AWOL tonight. We are not sure where he is. Dan, phone home. If anyone knows Dan's whereabouts, let us know. The good news is, even though Dan is not here tonight, I have a very special guest, a returning guest who was here in January. And at that time, our special guest spoke about the role of artistry. Let me get the title here for you exactly. It was Leading by Inspiration, the Role of the Artist in Society. Little did we know back in January that this guest's idea of art, well, we knew that it was based in the creation, in the sense that we are created in the image of God, and this artistic ability comes through that creative connection. But little did we know that this person viewed nature as the first art form. We have since gotten close to this guest. She's helped us out at programs that we've launched with the Royal Falcon Foundation. I'm going to just read a little bit of her bio and then introduce her. She's a writer, a speaker. She's known as the Sovereign Gardener for co-creating a more beautiful world. The star and the writer of the micro-documentary Real Unity, produced by Free the People and screened at the Anthem Film Festival, Freedom Fest. She now hosts a show on Free the People where she interviews whistleblowers, dissidents, and other alternative voices in the Western world. Planting victory gardens in the Lehigh Valley and beyond, she has 10 plus years of gardening experience with a budding, I don't know if that's an intended pun there, a budding focus on landscape design. She embodies food freedom, steadily growing food and flowers, including fruits and vegetables, medicinal herbs for tea. I have had the pleasure of personally tasting some of her concoctions that were grown in our very own garden here. More about that over the course of the show. Medicinal herbs for tea and blooms beloved by pollinators. She is the director of the companion gardening program at the Royal Falcon Foundation. Lo and behold, we are also sponsored by the Royal Falcon Foundation, empowering young hearts and minds through experiential use of the transformative leadership curriculum. She teaches the co-creation of plant and people relationships with youth and families as inspired by the metaphor of humanity being food and flowers of one garden, among the societal forces of integration and disintegration. I'd like to welcome Sienna Heath to the show.
Thank you,
there she
Wade.
is.
I'm humbled. Thank you.
Those are many mouthfuls, but I can personally attest to how you deliver all of that and more with energy, with style, with heart. So I'd like to start by not only exploring some of the things that we've learned about you through working with you in the Royal Falcon programs and learning a little bit more, but also introduce some of that to the audience. So I'd like to start by asking you where your earliest, both artistic and this desire to be involved with nature and co-creating art through nature. Dig deep, go way back to your earliest experiences, your childhood memories about how that spark got started.
Well, anyone watching who knows me knows that I grew up in a family of 3 artists, just me and my parents, and also adjacent was my half-sister. So my parents are potters. They're clay artists, as they like to call themselves. And so my hands were literally in the clay, in the soil, from a very early age. I remember just down the street from our studio in a small town of Penargil, Pennsylvania, we harvested, I guess you could say harvested, clay from the soil, like just down the street. And I guess that's one of my earliest memories. And the theme of co-creation, I would say, is really rooted in my family, and also perhaps in what it means for me to be a Baha'i, which is like understanding that we are coming into a new world and that we are active co-creators. You know, we're not just passively experiencing it or watching it, but we are co-creating the more beautiful world that we know is possible, to paraphrase Charles Eisenstein's work.
Wonderful. And we're going to be getting into a little bit from the Garden of Eden as we go through the show. But one of the things you just said evoked an image from the Garden of Eden, the theme of the show, created in the image of God. But it says that God created man from the dust of the ground. And, you know, the image that we sometimes see is the forming and shaping of clay into something. So that reference of digging in, harvesting the clay and turning it into art evoked some of those thoughts from that book. So to tell us a little bit more about how you view nature as art, or the Garden of Eden as art in a sense.
Well, as we know, God did plant us in the garden, after all. And I view the garden as God's first work of art. And I think often when people think of art, they think of paintings, and I think of landscapes in particular. That's just kind of the way we're programmed to think of art. But maybe there's something to that, right? Because when we venture outside and we stumble into the woods, or even create our own piece of beauty in this world, I think perhaps like the simplest and most profound and godly way of doing that is to create a garden. And gardens are a microcosm of our world. And as we are coming into a new world or new earth, and we're birthing that, the theme of birthing and the theme of motherhood also comes into play, as we dig deep into those roots of where God first planted us and why.
Well, and I was just pulling up the verse, right? So this is in the book of Genesis, you have two parallel creation accounts, right? You have the first one that people often think of, which God created the earth in 7 days, and there are these stages. On the first day he created this, on the second day he created that, and that leads to a lot of debate. But then there's a second version that tells the story differently, and this is, skeptics and critics use this to show how the Bible isn't divinely inspired. Those of us who believe the Bible is divinely inspired see just the richness and the beauty of God telling the story in a couple of different ways, with different lessons in each one. But here in Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, and the Lord God, that's the tetragrammaton, the Yahweh, the YWHW, the eternal God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground made the eternal God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So there we have that first piece of art, signaled by a train, apparently over at your place. So is that what you're referring to when you say landscape is art and the garden of art? Is it that story, or what else can you tell us about that?
Yes, I would say that, and I would also call to the Baha'i prayer that is guiding our team at the Royal Falcon Foundation and teaching children and instilling moral values and spiritual values into them, and reminding them that they are noble beings. We're setting the humble intention to strengthen children as seedlings, so that each may become a fruitful tree, verdant and flourishing.
So the analogy of not only we're planted in the garden, but we are also trees that are in that sense spiritually planted in that garden and
Yes.
growing up in that garden.
And interestingly, trees can communicate through their roots, through the mycelium. If one tree is in need of help, the others will rally together underground. And what to us seems like utter silence, we don't even notice that. We have no way of knowing unless we, can properly research it. The roots run riotous. I think that's a metaphor that Rumi, the Persian poet, explores through his work is like the what happens in wintertime and what happens when perhaps it looks like there's nothing there's nothing growing on the surface. There's a whole network of what maybe in the human world what we could call virtues, like the really core roots of what it means to be a noble being, to be a person of God, to be a child of God, is to, I think, to remember that there's more to life than the material world. And one could say that the spiritual world is up above us. It's something that we ascend into. But also maybe if we look at like the metaphor of the tree's roots, and even like the little roots of a seedling, there's a mystery there that can be akin to the mystery of God.
So I've put some thought and some study, especially in the Baha'i writings, on the topic of the unity of religion and science. And the Baha'i writings speak to a time, in my view, that is yet in the future where religion and science will come together. And from what I've read, now I'm not going to take the time to show any of the quotes. It could spend 3 hours just on this. But from what I've read, my own personal idea here from what I've read is that there are two books of Revelation. We have, for example, the Word of God in all its forms. We have the Bible, for example. We have the book of Revelation, right? So the Word of God, the messages that come from God through his messengers, whether it be Moses, Jesus, the messengers in the Baha'i era, that's the revelation of God. Baha'is call them tablets, right? Others call them, the Torah, the Gospels, the words of Jesus. But then you have a second book of Revelation, and that is the creation itself. And the creation is the greater revelation. It is the revelation that we are now learning to read. And science is only now beginning to learn to read this great book of Revelation that is the creation itself. So when you share little anecdotes about the roots of a tree coming to each other's aid and explain how the roots of the trees can communicate with each other, this is the alphabet that we are learning as we begin to interpret what God has created. And it's funny, it's ironic that is the material world. That is the material world. But look at the spiritual richness that we can discern about who God is and what God expects of us simply by learning to read the book of the material creation. And I know when you did your programs at the camp that we had at Hillcrest, we'll share a clip of that maybe a little bit later. You use these beautiful metaphors, and I want you to share one as we go into the first commercial break around the flowers of the garden and the diversity. I know you've spoken about this, you so eloquently, not only in words, but experientially in the gardening program at the camp, illustrated and helped create an environment where the 11 to 15-year-old participants could imbibe of this, could learn this at a deep level.
Right. So as Baha'is, one of the the core values that we have is experiencing and uplifting the virtue of unity and diversity, and diversity of all kinds, including plant life. And we have a piece of scripture that encourages us to think of humanity as flowers of one garden. And recently, it's really piqued my interest in the past year how there's this spectrum of plants, from companion plants to antagonistic plants. Those are the proper agricultural terms. And also another agricultural term is families. We have plant families. And so when we're bringing together companions, particularly in a container, and in a container garden, we look at how to lay out the plants, which plants are companions and why, and how they benefit one another, and at times self-sacrifice for one another. And I taught the kids at camp that a geranium, for instance, will self-sacrifice, and it will take on an infestation of Japanese beetles so that a big dahlia flower can survive and attract pollinators for the rest of the garden, so that the garden itself can be fruitful and multiply all that is good and offer us the abundance of its harvest, of its food, of its flowers, of its herbs for tea. And that's all because in some cases, the geranium self-sacrifices itself, just as Christ did for us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to go now to a commercial break. When we come back, we'll start unpacking more of that. There's such a richness there. We'll talk a little bit about the antagonistic plants, as well as the companion plants. But all of this was really inspired by an author, Joan Hernandez. And my wife and I and some others did this book group on this book, Unity and Diversity. And we did that for like 8 months, and that grew into some of the ideas and concepts. And when we found out she had produced other books that we then incorporated into the curriculum of camp, this new Hillcrest Orchard camp that we had here in July was born from that seed of this one little book, Unity and Diversity. So I'm going to share now a word from our sponsor, Something or Other Publishing, that is now the publisher of this book. And I want to encourage everyone in the audience to join in on the chat. I'm seeing a couple of people joining in. Today, we will be giving away a copy of this book, Unity and Diversity, to the commenter, to the participant in the chat that Sienna feels has provided the comment that she likes the best. That for whatever reason, whatever sparks her heart as to picking one towards the end of the show, we'll give away a copy of this book to that person. So here we go with the commercial word from our sponsor. When we come back, we'll have more with Sienna. Stay tuned.
In a world seeking answers, where differences divide and unity seems distant, emerges a profound exploration. The Benefits of Unity and Diversity by Joan Hernandez. Is there a path beyond the ordinary notions of unity? How can we embrace the symphony of professions, races, cultures, and thoughts not just harmoniously, but also to fuel innovation and elevate decisions? Step into a world where unity and diversity is more than a phrase, it's a way of life. Joan Hernandez takes you on a journey through the heart of unity as it blossoms across countries, professions, teams, organizations, and even within families. Uncover the art of decision-making through consultation where truth is sought and well-being prevails. Navigate the keys to productive dialogue, affection, conscience-driven sharing, courtesy in expression, attentive listening, elements that transform conversations. Discover the roadmap to effective decisions, focusing discussions, gathering facts, brainstorming solutions, selecting paths forward, and assessing outcomes. The journey concludes with strategies to embrace diverse norms, gracefully navigating conflicts. If you're ready to transcend mere tolerance and embrace the boundless rewards of diversity, the Benefits of Unity and Diversity awaits. Unlock its transformative insights today.
Welcome back. There's the QR code, which you can use with your device, your phone, to simply scan that QR code, and it will take you right to a place where you can support the program and our sponsors by considering purchasing a copy for yourself, The Benefits of Unity and Diversity by Joan Hernandez, which has inspired so much greatness and goodness in the Royal Falcon Foundation programs that Sienna and others are now a part of. Sienna, the tagline to that book is how the clash of ideas, I think, can help you make better decisions, which is from a Baha'i quote that says, only in the clash of differing opinions will the shining spark of truth emerge. And I've often emphasized, because I come from a background where there was, frankly, a lot of debate and a lot of insistence on what is right and what things mean and what they don't mean in an attempt to navigate through life. I've backed off significantly on that approach to life since learning about the Baha'i faith and embracing it. But in this one quote, we see that there's still a time for that. And I emphasize the words only. In other words, there's no other way, only in the clash. So if you're not having a clash, that only isn't happening, right? Only in the clash of differing opinions. So those differing opinions have to be expressed. Can the shining spark of truth emerge? So the whole idea of cancel culture and safe spaces where ideas that are different are not tolerated, if we look at it in terms of biology, we're actually weakening our immune system and making ourselves more susceptible to those pests. And this is interesting in light of how the plants maybe self-sacrifice, and maybe even the antagonistic plants serve a purpose. Any thoughts on any of that?
Well, the pair of antagonistic plants that comes to mind are cabbages and strawberries. And they're the crunchy cabbages and the sweet strawberries that don't belong anywhere near each other in this garden that Abdu'l Baha speaks of. The cabbages, they secrete a substance from their roots that makes it very hard for anything to grow around them. A lot of things don't grow well around cabbages, and strawberries is one of them. So in the springtime when you're planting, you want to make sure that they're well spaced. And I will say I'm intentionally teaching container gardening to the kids. One, because it's convenient and it's easier to garden in containers, but two, because I think the philosophy of container gardening is really, really relevant to the time that we're in, and maybe a time that we'll be in for a really long time, where not everyone really belongs together in this sort of kumbaya wildflower garden that we might envision when we read the poetic devices used in the Baha'i writings. We are not in the wild seed sowing phase of humanity. We are in the container gardening phase. We are in a place where we are looking for our companions, right? We are looking for our friends and for our families, as plants do. Even naturally, they will spring up together to benefit one another. Nonetheless, you're right. Only from the clash of differing ideas comes the shining spark of truth. I'm not really sure what to make of that in terms of gardening.
Well, I have a thought. I have a thought here. So
yeah.
yeah, I have a thought here, and this is what we do here on the show for the audience. And by the way, another participant. This is from Cameron Cowan, who is the director of anthologies for Something or Other Publishing. Thank you, Cameron, for tuning in. He says the concept of a safe space has gotten really screwed up. There's a time and a place for ideas to be spread, but it's very hard when you're a minority and other people are talking about you, right? That might be the cabbage secreting its whatever and making it unlivable for the strawberries.
Yeah. But I'm glad that Cameron brought up the concept of a safe space, because we can't keep our plants and our people in safe spaces and containers forever. When you're hardening off seedlings, actually, you are intentionally exposing your seedlings, as you would perhaps your children, to adversity. You're transitioning them from the comforts of indoors to outdoors by gradually exposing them to more light, to more wind, even to cold or to hot temperatures. And nowadays in society, and maybe, for as long as time, there's the tendency for parents to hover and to
Yes.
to want to protect their kids at all costs. But if we really are flowers of one garden, we can't do that.
Well, we actually practiced something that's a tiny bit like hovering. It was, I forget, we had a friend who called it something like eagle eye, or I forget. Anyway, where you let your kids go, but you like walk behind them like a block and a half, so that you're there and you see them, but they don't see you. And this is, we're talking about when our kids were like 4 or 5, and you're letting them like walk 2 blocks over to the neighbor's house for the first time in our modern neighborhoods, where maybe it's not as safe as, some of the baby boomers can remember, and so on, or the way we've grown up in certain safe places. But here, Cameron continues his thought within that scenario he described. You're not defending ideas, you're defending your own existence, which again gets back to that cabbage and that strawberry, and your right to exist in society, and that isn't a fight for everyone. But I'd like to, because I think we have a lot of Baha'is watching tonight. From the Baha'i writings, I've heard so many Baha'is speak of a world without borders, and this is a vision and a prediction and a prophecy that eventually we'll have a world without borders eventually, right? And I'm reminded of the promise of communism, in which once the revolution happened and the new government took over and had this equitable distribution, from each according to its, I forget what the saying is, from each according to its needs, and in other words, the communist distribution of goods in fairness and equality. And the idea was that eventually the government would slowly just fade away and the people would be governing themselves happily, right? But it didn't turn out that way in most of the actual examples. And so this vision of a world without borders, interestingly, in the book Secret of Divine Civilization, Abdu'l-Baha maps out a very specific multi-step process of how to get there. And the very first step, he says, you can go look it up, I'm not going to share the quote, is to firmly fix the borders, right? So the path, thank you, to each according to their ability and their need is the phrase I'm looking for. But the idea is, firmly fix the borders is the first step towards a world without borders. Interestingly, that is the prescription of how to get there. So we're not there yet. We're clearly not there yet in many of these things. It's a process. It's an unfolding process that may take centuries. And so I think you're right, Sienna. When you talk about, in the programs that you're working with, you talk about container planting and the first learning the basics, which we've somehow forgotten. Why? Because we've got, let's invite you to talk and me to talk less here by asking you for what is the difference between modern agriculture, which seeks to maximize the ability to perhaps produce one crop, right?
Oh.
And not only optimize the yield of that one crop, but also monoculture, acre after acre in a specific environment, not just acre after square mile after square mile, right? The green revolution depended on a massive increase in yield and economic profitability of a crop, which has led to many, many problems versus the approach that you're taking.
Right. What comes to mind with regards to monoculture are crops like corn, soybeans, that sort of thing, which we see driving down the road. You can tell it's all one plant, one crop. Well, an alternative to that, and an ancient practice by some indigenous tribes, is planting the three sisters, which are corn, beans, and squash. And so, of course, the corn grows high up, and the beans go up the corn, and the squash travels on the ground. And the purpose of that is not only to maximize the space, but also the beans add nitrogen to the soil. They replenish the soil with much needed nitrogen. And then the squash has a place to travel between the corn, and also keeps the weeds down. And you can also plant certain flowers with the three sisters that would attract pollinators and encourage more food production. And this is done in a way that's it's a perfect embodiment of unity and diversity, right? And also an embodiment of plant and people relationships, because we're seeing what's called the three sisters work together, and they're giving each other enough space and room to grow, and they're serving their roles and fulfilling their responsibilities, which I guess one could say is like ordained by God. And we, as the sovereign gardeners, we are meant to have, in a way, dominion over the earth, but that doesn't mean that we get to trash the earth. It means that we have a humble responsibility. We are humble servants, stewards of the planet. And I do think that one way of serving the planet is to regard the plants as ourselves, regard the plants as people of sorts, as our brothers and sisters and companions and families. And it's probably not an accident that we use that kind of language to describe them.
I love that language, and I'm so glad to have you here to introduce it and reintroduce it, and to provide this focus that is so desperately needed. I'm going to ask a question. We'll begin to get into it, and then we're going to go to a commercial break. The time is just flying by because it's so fascinating. But we'll introduce the question. We'll begin to get into it, and then we'll come back for more after the commercial break. The question is, do these little tiny individual efforts and projects make a difference? How can they make a difference? Can we be the change in that sense that we want to see in the world? And is that kind of what your work is about?
Oh, well, yeah, of course they make a difference. Even just work that nourishes the soil and replenishes it with nutrients after it's been poisoned with various chemicals or sucked of its nutrients by monoculture. Even just that work alone, that makes a huge difference. As far as working with children and what we're doing with the Royal Falcon Foundation, with our camps and our trainings, I think it makes a world of a difference, because we are embodying the Flowers of One Garden philosophy. We are introducing virtues of orderliness, of self-sacrifice, of teamwork, support, care, kindness, creativity. We are introducing all of these virtues. We are uplifting those seedlings that we compare to our children. And we're doing it in a way that's really meaningful, and it's experiential. We're not telling the kids all of these things, we're showing them. And meanwhile, also making a difference and dressing and keeping the garden.
Well, I remember an early mentor of mine, Roman Borek, may he rest in peace, just a wonderful, wonderful man who I was on the City of David archaeological expedition with him in 1981. And he just passed away a year or two ago, but just incredibly fond memories of him. And one of the things he taught me my first semester at college was the best sermon is a sterling example. And you're certainly living that in the work that you're doing. We had also last week on the show, and now I've got the Reverend Barbara Breon. And she wrote a book, Blooming for Christ. You earlier mentioned Jesus and his sacrifice. She will be joining us in Arizona for the program, and hopefully one of the families from her congregation out in Virginia. So we're doing a series actually on this topic, and I want to now play a video about her book. We had her on last week, and to remember her and thank her for her contribution, I came across this book because of the picture on the cover and the theme and the title, Blooming for Christ. So we'll take a look at this, and then we'll be back with more from Sienna. Stay tuned.
In a world where faith takes root and blossoms, comes a journey of growth like no other. Blooming for Christ, a captivating exploration of spirituality and the remarkable parallels between a plant's journey and our own. Just as a seed must germinate to become a thriving plant, our spiritual timeline begins with a single decision. Through the insightful words of Reverend Barbara Brian, this book takes you on a transformative quest. A journey of growth that echoes the stages of a plant's life. From the tender shoot of a young believer bravely facing the world, to the full bloom of faith experiences shared and cherished. As seeds of faith are sown, new believers are nurtured, and the cycle continues just as God intended. But the journey doesn't end there. As the plant matures, so does the believer, becoming God's chosen harvester in gardens of divine purpose. Reverend Brian's guidance, rooted in scripture and wisdom, gently leads you through the seasons of your spiritual life. Join us on this journey of discovery and renewal, a journey that unveils the beauty of your faith and the transformative power of God's love. Blooming for Christ. Embrace your season of growth and let your faith bloom. Available now.
And there's that QR code for anyone who wants to check that out. So right before that break, we were talking about being the change that you want to see, setting the example, some of the benefits that come from the work you're doing. Do you have a few stories or anecdotes of some of the experiences you've had over the last couple of years as you are a gardener working in that field, whether it be the more the physical material, what people are learning in terms of agriculture and how to feed themselves, or the deeper, profound life lessons about who we are and what our purpose is that might come from getting your hands into the earth?
Well, I hesitate to share what comes to mind, actually, but I actually left a community garden after actually a deep family history there of 5 years. And basically what happened was that they were not advocating for everyone's right to enter a space with food. If you didn't get a certain thing in your arm, there was an instance where you couldn't register to attend a dinner. And I wanted to grow in a community where everyone's material reality was not so important. It wasn't like the way that we are equal is that we're all spiritual beings. It doesn't matter what's in your body, what's on your body, what the color of your skin is, or whatever medical choices you make, or what your gender is, all of that. What matters is that we are noble beings and we're spiritual beings. So I will say, I think what I learned, actually, the timing is actually one of the principles that I've been introducing to the kids, is that like you need to time when you plant certain seeds and when you introduce certain seedlings and plants to the garden. Also, the timing of when you and I met, Wade, was just as I was leaving that community garden. And I had written a piece about companion planting, and I had realized that I was a strawberry in a cabbage patch. And I guess maybe what you're looking for was more like
no, this
on the ground,
no,
gardening
I'm thinking
advice, but that's really I would say one of the most recent transformative experiences for me with regards to gardening is understanding in real life, like the principles of timing and of companion planting, like as it relates to people and even where it is that I want to keep a garden.
Well, there's, what comes to mind is being uprooted, being transplanted, having to find a safer environment. Cameron's comments earlier, there are a variety of circumstances and times in life where we have to make decisions and choices. And I'm sure you could come up with analogies in gardening. There's the whole pruning, right? A tree grows when pruned. There's so many rich analogies. But I know you have shared, or I remember the time when we met, and that was a very, very painful experience for you because you had invested so much of yourself, and you had been serving. And there's a time and a place for even learning some of the lessons of a martyr, right? Um, I'm trying to think of an analogy now. There's something about trees that don't bend, they break, and there's all these things. I don't know that are coming to mind.
Bamboo.
Yeah, tell us about bamboo.
Well, bamboo is an example of what you just said, that it bends, it does not often break. And it's because it maintains its innocence. It's often green as it's growing. When it dries out, that's when it gets brittle. And so I guess you could compare that to people. They can get brittle and hardened, and that's when they break. But if they maintain their innocence and their love, then they can be flexible in where it is that they grow and how they adjust to the shifting winds.
Well, I recently read something. It's interesting. Cameron's here. He's the one that shared this link. I won't give the context, but what was shared was that childhood trauma is a key indicator of future success, which is surprising because many times that trauma almost becomes too much. But for many, that trauma, when understood and in a sense nurtured properly, does something. It becomes a catalyst. And in my own life, I just had a cousin actually pass away in Sweden. And now I'm suddenly considering maybe flying to Sweden in the next week or so. And I'm thinking anew about the fact that I'm fluent in Swedish. I lived in Sweden for 2.5 years, 4th, 5th, and half of 6th grade. That's it. But my Swedish is, I'm sure he's not listening, is actually better than my dad's, who grew up there. And the reason is, in my own mind, is that there was a particular trauma associated with me being kidnapped away from my mother by my father in a domestic kidnapping, being dropped into a Swedish family, not speaking a word, and within a month having to go to school in 4th grade with kids a year older than me. A lot of reasons for all this, and just being there for 2 years, separated from both parents, and for a while from both my sisters. Very traumatic, really super traumatic. But for me, languages come super easy. I speak several of them fluently, and something happened in my brain. Something happened in my brain right at that moment where the super learning adaptability of your brain was challenged. And, because kids that are 2, 4, 6, they have this super learning capability. Your brain, science says that we only use 10% of the capacity of our brain. And it's completely underutilized, but there was just the right time, the right place, the right catalyst. So as traumatic as it was, I gained like a superhuman power of learning languages, and they stuck. Something happened in that moment of trauma. And because they say whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think we do. I think we are a little bit too protective in our society today. I'm off point here, but to your point of being uprooted and the challenge that you faced now with a year or more of distance, what have you learned from that experience of being uprooted from that community and having to be transplanted somewhere else?
Oh, well, it's only been since March.
Wow, sorry.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
still too close to really reflect and draw those lessons. I don't know.
Well, I've actually, it was almost on the dot 5 years prior. I left. Sorry. I left my garden during my divorce. So, and I also learned how trauma and uprooting can be a catalyst.
But it takes time, and it takes nurturing and care and love from others. I mean, finding a new community. Have you found new communities?
Yeah.
New friends, new outlets?
Oh my gosh, like the doors that have opened up for me in the past few years, it's honestly, it's opened my eyes and I hope no one takes it personally, but it's kind of opened my eyes as to what was missing in my relationships and my friendships of all kinds before 2020 and before I left my first garden in 2018. Like, I think the social upheaval too, and the forces of disintegration in my personal life and in the world at large, it pushed me to find people such as you, and such as, thank you, Cameron, and such as just countless friends, a local spiritual center, even closer relationships with family. There's just been this overwhelming call for specifically from people who want to learn how to grow their own food. Like when the pandemic hit in 2020, I can't tell you just how many people called out to me, and they called and they texted, and finally I started what was the quarantined gardener. I was dubbing myself the quarantine gardener because I was very much quarantined for spring 2020. And then just to put it plainly, I woke up to the government overreach and all that. I woke up to a lot of things in summer 2020. And I kind of hesitated to keep calling myself the quarantine gardener. It didn't seem on brand for me, but I just kind of lazily kept the name and the website. And it was just in March of this year that I came out of the closet and transitioned from the quarantine gardener to the sovereign gardener. Asserting my food freedom, my garden freedom, and surprisingly, I experienced such overwhelming support, even from people who disagreed with me, and I think that was key, because there were people that fundamentally disagreed with my reasons for leaving that community garden, who I think because I had co-created with other gardeners there, with dear friends. I had co-created beauty, and I had shared flowers. I was like that person that would be like that hippie child, going out and giving flowers to people and wandering around with the deer in the forest and taking photos with a friend of mine, and sharing the produce. They suddenly, and even for me and my relationship, suddenly all that socio-political difference that seems so important, suddenly while it was my reason for leaving the garden, it actually was a catalyst to help me understand, that's not what matters, and that's not what really unifies people. What unifies people is beauty. And I think also me uprooting myself and me leaving and basically taking that beauty away, I I think that made more of an impact than anything I've ever said or written in the past 5 years.
Wow. I wanted to share a couple of comments here before we go to commercial break again, as the time is flying. I believe this is Barbara. Certainly, I think that's her ministry. So thank you for tuning in. Referring to a number of the themes that we've been covering and saying it all fits. These are not antagonists, all these different diverse things. Thank you, Barbara. And then assertive life coaching. As someone who's about to become a certified trauma-informed life coach, I can attest that while trauma can stunt growth in a person, it can also become a catalyst to the greatest growth. So thank you for that. And I'm sure providing an amazing service to those who are going through that trauma so that it becomes a growth opportunity and not something that, causes one to, experience undue arrested development.
Absolutely. That's my friend Laura. She runs Assertive Life Coaching. She's a local friend, and I recommend anyone who's looking to set healthy boundaries in their life to reach out to her for coaching.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're going to go again to a quick commercial break. And as we're talking here, this particular advertisement, if you will, for the Royal Falcon Foundation, which is inspired also by something called the Royal Falcon Press, which is an imprint of Something or Other Publishing, which has a desire of building a spiritual community on, through books, through anthologies, through spiritual and religious writings of all types. A very ambitious goal. But as I hear you talk, Sienna, I'm thinking it's possible. Because as you mentioned, you've made all these diverse connections and people are coming together, even people that disagree, but who have a common goal of growth and experiencing love and harmony in diversity. So here's a brand new video about the Royal Falcon Foundation, which we're going to be hearing a lot more about as this show grows. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more from Sienna, including going through more of these comments and deciding who should be the lucky winner of the book by Joan Hernandez, Unity and Diversity. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the Royal Falcon Foundation. Our curriculum and activities inspire and train adolescents through hands-on experiences, fostering growth and empowerment. Through immersive and challenging experiences, we shape young minds to think independently and develop their leadership skills. Our programs foster new friendships and unity, shaping young leaders to tackle real-world challenges with confidence. We believe in equipping the next generation with the skills to become leaders of tomorrow. Join us at the Royal Falcon Foundation and be part of a journey that empowers, unites, and inspires. Visit our website and embrace a world of possibilities today. RoyalFalconFoundation.com.
Welcome back. So
Thank you.
So Sienna, I'm just teeing up a clip from the Hillcrest Orchard Youth Camp that talks about all of this stuff, and so be ready for that. But what else do you want to share with us about the topics that we were just talking about right before the break while I tee this video up?
Sure. Well, two other virtues that come into practice in gardening, and particularly in my companion planting program, are detachment and patience. And in the framework of sovereign gardening and kind of godly gardening, God's gardens, we can consider surrendering to God's will for the garden and for all that goes on and all the relationships and communications that happen among the plants.
Very cool. Well, I'm gonna now share a couple of minutes of video. This was taken by Emmy-nominated filmmaker Jafar Falahi, who helped launch this very show. Some of you long-timers might remember he was a co-host for a while. We haven't seen him here, but he's out there doing his work, and he came to the camp, took this video, and his team edited it. Enjoy. We'll be talking about this here in a minute.
Spot up there, there's a path. We're going to take that path up that way. On the nature walk, the students were out there with butterfly nets, catching things that we could catch, grasshoppers, dragonflies. So this is where the idea of diversity comes in, is that when you have a diverse population of plants, you're going to have a diverse population of insects, which is going to help the ecosystem be stronger. We were engaged in conversations about how agriculture plays a huge role in land conservation and ecological balance. When we want young people to care about the environment, we have to have them feel connected to the environment.
Okay, you can sit back down. Now, who has petunias?
Oh, me, that's me.
Okay, so the way these work is they protect one another, and at times they self-sacrifice for one another. So what I would like you to do to start is pick two of your favorites, preferably two different plants. My activity was the gardening. We talked a lot about the beauty of unity and diversity in the companion planting of certain flowers protecting certain vegetables. We were also measuring our hands, spacing each plant at least the span of your hand. And that introduced the moral component of giving each other space, setting boundaries so that each person or plant has room to grow.
You have a geranium, you can put yours in the corner here.
In the natural world, the food and flowers, the plants are like people, and we can be like them.
Does that bring back memories?
I am just so proud of those kids. Sometimes it felt like organized chaos, but every day when we would take a step back and look at what they planted, I was honestly so impressed at how it turned out. We mainly planted potatoes and petunias, among other flower companions. And oh my goodness, and also the experience of like inviting play into the space. Like I had planned like measuring our hands, and so we were like putting our, kids love doing that, like putting their hands up to one another. And mine is about 6 inches. Most people it's about like 6 or 7 inches. So that's always like a good gauge of spacing and kind of a more organic way of spacing. And even like kind of like letting the kids almost like mother themselves. Like they would like treat themselves to little mists of the hose, like if they were getting hot or tired. And I think so much of my life, even my gardening life, sometimes I take so seriously, and the kids really helped me learn how to invite some fun into the experience.
Yeah, it was such an amazing camp, and your contribution was just wonderful. We are in fact overwhelmed with cucumbers, all kinds of cucumbers. We had a really interesting discussion because it seems like there was some cross-pollination going on. Some of the cucumbers came out yellow with really hard skins, and we think they were maybe cross-pollinated with some of the other things in the garden. That was a suggestion that one person made, because we had this real diversity of cucumbers coming from these plants with different flavors and textures and stuff. But now we will be in Arizona on October 18th to 23rd. And anyone watching this, please do get in touch with us. I'm going to put a link in here right now to invite anyone to email us. If you'd like to participate in one of these programs, there will be one in Arizona in October. There will be one in Florida in January, perhaps a couple. Others are brewing. We'll have another one here in Wisconsin coming up at the end of September, where you're flying out for that, right? You're working with my wife Angela. Tell us a little bit about what you're cooking up, or plant the seeds that you're planting around that activity here on our property. And I think it's the weekend of September 30th. Is that right?
Yes. Mainly we'll be harvesting the potatoes that the kids planted in summer. And we'll be making French fries with those potatoes. And I've also got a conversation planned around the phases of plant and people relationships. If you'd like, I can share the 12 phases really quick.
By all means.
Okay. All right. So the idea is that they implement this philosophy in their relationships with themselves, their friends, and their families. So first we have sacred flow, establishing a foundation of rich, healthy soil. We ask, how can fertile soil invite a commitment to co-create joy, love, and group identity to make way for healthy corrections, which we could also consider as amendments to the soil, to the foundation that we're building. Then there's sacred force, defining the container. What companions will we plant and how might they benefit each other, and how could their companionships be really dynamic and perhaps change over time. Then there's opening up, allowing some seeds to open up. Sometimes they need to be soaked, other times you can just toss them right in the ground. There's timing, there's exposing seedlings to adversity as you harden them off, proper spacing, deadheading, pruning, and weeding, as we talked about, which actually deadheading and pruning and weeding as well, like they're good examples of disintegration, right? And how, like, why pinching dead blooms is actually a good thing. And it doesn't necessarily put disintegration into the realm of bad and integration into the realm of good. We just understand that through pruning and through even composting, it's all part of the process.
So it's actually a natural cycle, but yet we have a role to play in dressing and keeping the garden. But we're in tune with the natural forces of integration and disintegration. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And all the while we're growing together, we're protecting one another, we're creating spiritual sustenance or fertilizer, if you will. And one other term in agriculture is maturity, when a plant matures. And so when, like we saw in that short video clip, the kids were planting the potatoes and the flowers, and they were spacing them at least the span of their hands, if not more. So they spaced them properly so that the plants can mature. That's the actual term, is that they can mature and grow close to one another in time. And finally, the harvesting, and also the lessons that can be learned from dormancy, perennials that go dormant in the colder months, the death and the rebirth. There's such richness in all the moral education and spiritual education that we can offer these kids. And I love the philosophy that we're embodying too, which is diffusing the fragrance. We know that from Baha'i writings of diffusing the fragrance of a rose. We might say, you're not shoving the rose down someone's throat. You are allowing the rose to diffuse its fragrance and attracting any or all who are who want to come by and stop and smell those roses.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've also inspired a thread of thought that I'd like to share. In the Baha'i writings, you've got 4 kingdoms, right? You've got the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. Is that right?
Right.
And then I was just thinking about the periodic table, and I probably failed chemistry if I ever took it. I don't think I ever took chemistry, but if I had taken it, I probably would have failed it. But there are 120 elements or something, or maybe there's 240. I don't know. But there's, Cameron may know, that man knows everything. Anyway, so there are a certain limited number of elements on the periodic table, right? And then you get into the plant kingdom. Wow, right? An explosion. But then you get into the animal kingdom, and the diversity is in a way even richer, right? Land animals, sea animals, air animals, mammals and reptiles and insects, and the diversity is astounding. Then you get to the human kingdom. We're just one species.
2 genders.
Thank you.
And we're canceled.
Created in the image of God, male and female. So one species. Shocking when I thought of it. And we're constantly talking about diversity, and yet we're just one species. But within that one species, we have a complexity and a diversity. Thank you, Cameron. 118. I was so close when I said 120. I should have just stopped.
That book is going to go to Cameron, and Cameron, you should reach out to me. We obviously have a lot to talk about.
Thank you. So she's already made her decision. Wow. I'm going to make a sexist comment. A woman who's decisive. I love it. So
Oh.
thank you. So one species, but isn't it shocking? We're always talking about diversity, diversity, diversity. There's only one species. It didn't really occur to me. We're just one species. And yet we're constantly talking about diversity, the richness and the depth of our subtle differences. It's just interesting. I don't know what to even make of that cognitive dissonance that I now experience when I think about the diversity of plant species, the diversity of animal species. But when we talk about the human kingdom, there's just one species.
Cameron says diversity is all about having a wide variety of complementary things, talents, backgrounds, and purposes. Forests thrive from diversity.
Right, but they've got all kinds of different species living in there. So interesting. I don't know what to make of.
Well, actually, as we come to a close, shall we read the quote from Abdu'l-Baha about?
Please do.
The diversity. Yes. Consider the flowers of a garden, though differing in kind, color, form, and shape, yet inasmuch as they are refreshed by the waters of one spring, revived by the breath of one wind, invigorated by the rays of one sun, this diversity increaseth their charm and addeth unto their beauty. How unpleasing to the eye if all the flowers and plants, the leaves and blossoms, the fruit, the branches and the trees of that garden were all of the same shape and color. Diversity of hues, form, and shape enricheth and adorneth the garden, and heighteneth the effect thereof. In like manner, when diverse shades of thought, temperament, and character are brought together under the power and influence of one central agency, the beauty and glory of human perfection will be revealed and made manifest. So the diversity is of thought, temperament, and character. Of one
Wonderful.
Species.
Wonderful. Sienna, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show tonight. And we can't wait for you to be back here in Wisconsin for the fall camp and with us again in Arizona in October. Thank you for everything that you've been contributing, and thank you for this wonderful discussion. We will have you back anytime that you can make time for us to continue this discussion. And thank you for all the comments in the chat, Cameron. That book will be going to you per Sienna. And any last thoughts, or just let those words from Abdu'l-Baha be the concluding statement for tonight?
Well, let them conclude my thoughts on the topic. And I just want to express my gratitude to you, Wade, and to Angela, your wife. I always get value from our conversations and our experiences, and the transformation that we're experiencing together that we can extend to the kids that we're teaching is invaluable. I suppose it's valuable and invaluable at the same time. It's a paradox.
And the program in Arizona is actually a family program. So the core 11 to 15-year-old program will be there. I think I shared in a previous program, or else I'll share it in coming weeks, the transformative leadership core curriculum and the challenge course. We talked about that trauma and accustoming your children, right? Accustoming your children to hardship, right? That course with its 9 stations, or 11 stations we had this last time, and 2 hours of grueling, obstacle course, but in such a fun and educational way. That will be a core component of what we have in Arizona for the 11 to 15-year-olds. But we'll also have, for their older siblings and young adults, participatory sort of staff in training activities, guides for the program, and then the parents will have informative sessions and rich discussion groups on spiritual parenting, and also workshop elements on how to stage a camp like this in your own area, in your backyard, as it were. So something for everyone. The whole family is invited to come to the Transformative Leadership Camp at the Desert Rose Baha'i Institute in Arizona from the 18th to the 23rd of October. And again, reach out to info@soupllc.com. I already put that in the chat for more information about that. In terms of this show, next week, we will have a short break from our plant-based discussions. 2 weeks from now, we've got an amazing person coming. I'll go ahead and announce it. Hope I don't jinx it, but he has agreed to come on the show. Joseph Atman, the founder and CEO of Middle Tree, who has written this book, A Philosophical War, will be here in 2 weeks to revisit and reignite this theme of planting and the Garden of Eden and whatnot. Next week, we've got a break following up on Eileen Maddox's show of a couple of weeks ago. We'll have Jay Tyson, who will be having the second part on that series on prophecy, the book of Daniel. He'll be talking about the great disappointment of William Miller, and all on the basis of his twin books, The Wise Men of the West and The Wise Men of the East, a historical fiction novel about those events in 1844. So lots of good things coming up in the next few weeks. And Sienna, we will have you back as well.
I would love that. And also, if any educators out there are interested in the companion gardening curriculum that I'm developing, I'm hoping to have it ready by late fall or early winter. So they're welcome to reach out to me on my website. I'm at siennamaeheath.com, or on Facebook or Instagram at The Sovereign Gardener. I would just love to get in touch with anyone who wants to work with me or instill some of these values in their children. Also, locally, if anyone's watching locally, I'm going to be providing an herbal tea gardening workshop at the Greenshire Institute, which is a spiritual center in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, near where I live.
So let me put that method or means of contacting you right in the chat. Could you repeat that? Anyone who wants to get in touch with you?
Sure. So first, there's a contact page on siennamaeheath.com.
Just check that I spelled that correctly. Well, you know what? I'm just going to copy the home page. I've got it up right here. Okay. I'm going to actually.
Yeah, you got it. You could share it, I guess. Yeah. Actually, my Facebook and Instagram are linked. If you just scroll down a bit, you'll see Facebook and Instagram icons. You can click on that or just contact me.
Oh wow! What did I just do? I don't know. I gave your entire bio there instead of just the website, but there you go. Now they have everything and more about you. Let me finish up there with the way to contact you through your website.
Oh, here, I'll just pop my email address in the chat. You can post that publicly. That's really the easiest way.
Wonderful. My apologies, Sienna, for not teeing that up for people to get in touch with you. I was giving you space. I'm so glad that
you're giving me space.
Making yourself available and opening up the floodgates. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Looking forward to seeing you next week. And Sienna, namaste. Thank you so much. And good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Wade.